He arrived as a teenager, confident in his ability and poised to race against the best. Just 4 years after his first race, Troy Ruttman was on the verge of stardom at the most prestigious auto race in the world, the Indy 500. Hello, I'm Paul Page. Troy Ruttman's uncanny driving ability brought him to Indy with a world of potential. At the age of 22, he lived up to that promise, becoming the youngest driver ever to win the 500. Shortly after that 1952 victory, his luck would change. A severe arm injury and a difficult personal life would slow down Ruttman's rapidly moving career. Though he came back to race competitively, he never did become the dominant force everyone expected. What he did become was a respected veteran, a driver admired by his peers. Troy Ruttman became a legend at the Indy 500, a race for heroes. Soaring high above Florida's Gulf Coast, Troy Ruttman is at the controls, enjoying his retirement from the pressures of championship auto racing. His passion for flying is genuine and provides plenty of time to reflect on an outstanding career which began in 1945.
A friend of mine told me in a school that they had a track, the Ashcan Derby in San Bernardino, California. You could run any car you wanted, any kind of pickup or a truck. You didn't have to be of age, you could run. And I really kind of thought he was wrong, but he said he was right, and he turned out to be right.
They drove down there in his father's work car, and my husband is standing talking with a fellow outside, and he heard him make an announcement that he heard him say that there was a new interest that come, and he was late, and they was going to give him the privilege of starting on the pole. And so my husband just thought it was somebody, you know, else. He didn't think it was Troy, because Troy didn't say he was going to drive his car. So he just stood there, and when the race started and when it was over, well, it was Troy that was on the pole. And he won that main event, the first main event he started.
The next year, Ruttman was driving in the California Roadster Association Series for hot rods. In 1947, he won the series title at the age of 17. At one of those races, he made a lasting impression on another young driver.
In my early days, I used to go crawl over the fence and watch the race cars run at Carroll Speedway, and Troy Ruttman was a young, very aggressive, colorful guy, and he just stuck to me. He's, you know, for some reason, I guess maybe the first race I ever seen him drive or something, he started in the back and come through and won the race, you know, and I never forgot that.
In 1948, he was racing midgets against the likes of future Indy winner Roger Ward.
I grew up with Troy Ruttman in the midgets, and of course he was as great a natural driver as anybody ever knew. I don't know of anybody who had more natural ability than Troy Ruttman. He could do things with race cars that were they were miracles.
Ruttman was running in and winning races he wasn't legally old enough to enter. The age question was becoming a tough obstacle.
So a few times we had to change his driver's, his birth certificate, you know, to show.
How did you do it?
Well, we just changed the date.
In 1949, car owner Ray Carter decided to give the young phenomenon a chance at Indy. The car was old, the 1941 Indianapolis winner, but Ruttman was able to qualify, starting in the 18th position. The official scorecard listed Ruttman as 23 years old. He was 19. Steadily moving up in the pack, Ruttman was in 4th place, just past the halfway mark. But then he took an extremely long pit stop and finished the race at a much slower pace.
I remember we had to make a pit stop early to change a complete magneto. Stands up in my mind, and it was a very lengthy thing. And it was due to the way they scored the race, or I would never even finish 12th, as I remember. They changed that soon after, maybe even after that year. I really legitimately, in my mind, didn't run a 12th, but that's what they paid me for.
By the next year, people were calling him another Rex Mays. He even looked the part, driving for the Bose Sealfast team that Mays had frequented. In practice, Ruttman was fast, unofficially running near record times, but he knew he still had a lot to learn.
As time went on, I could see I was a little shy here or there. The Bose car, I felt I should have won it, but see, by wrecking that car prior to the race and qualifying, or practice prior to qualifying, was a big setback to the Bose team and myself.
Some say that Ruttman had just completed the first unofficial 135-mile-an-hour lap when he crashed. But the rebuilt car would not perform well. Starting the race from the 24th position, Ruttman ran steadily, but never entered the top 10. On lap 138, the race was stopped because of rain. Ruttman, who was several laps off the lead, finished 15th. In 1951, Ruttman turned 21, and he called J.C. Agajanian on an old promise.
Aggie told me way back when I was a young fellow, probably after we'd known each other a year or so, and I realized that he was in racing in other ways other than just promoting races. He owned some sprint cars. He also owned the Indy car. And so he told me then, when I become of age, I was more than welcome to drive for him, but not prior to that. And so when I became 21, I went to him. I says, now, Aggie, you have 2 Indy cars at this time. He says, no problem. I'll hire you to drive the other one, which I did.
He stepped into the car that Walt Faulkner put on the pole in 1950. It was a proven performer, and Ruttman qualified for the 6th starting position. 78 laps into the race, a broken crankshaft would knock him out of contention. Driving again for Agajanian, Ruttman lined up for the 1952 race on the inside of the 3rd row. With Freddie Agabashian's pole-sitting diesel and 3 supercharged cars on the first 2 rows, the start was sluggish. Jim Ruttman, starting from the inside of the 4th row, took everyone by surprise.
I just zipped out of line and got down low and just took off. I could have been leading it, but I figured they'd black flag me or something and throw me out of the race going in the first corner, so I backed off and I let Jack McGrath in the corner first.
Moving quickly up behind the front runners were Bill Vukovich in car number 26 and Troy Ruttman in number 98. By the 7th lap, Vukovich was in the lead, and on the 10th lap, Ruttman pulled into 2nd place. Lap 12, Ruttman moved into 1st, but was repassed, and Vukovich went on to stretch his lead. On lap 62, Vukovich pulled into the pits with a 29-second lead, and Ruttman moved ahead. Trying to run the race on only 1 pit stop, Ruttman led the race until lap 83. It was a costly stop. Fuel spilled on his exhaust, starting a fire.
Well, I thought to myself, if I've ever gambled, I'm going to sit in this car right now, regardless of what happened. Because if I'd have jumped out, it would have killed the engine. It would be a vapor lock, and then you have a heck of a time starting, and that would have sure sunk me down the river. So I thought the best thing to do is stay in the car. They got it put out.
The 2-minute stop dropped Ruttman to 3rd place, more than 1.5 minutes behind Vukovich. Andy Granatelli's driver, Jim Ruttman, was in 2nd. Ruttman was making up lost time, gaining 6 seconds on the lead between laps 100 and 110. When Ruttman stopped, Ruttman advanced to 2nd, still more than 1 minute behind Vukovich. Just after 130 laps, Vukovich was ready for his 2nd stop. Ruttman would make up some of his lost time. But trouble was developing with his right front wheel. With Vukovich in the pits, Ruttman was able to regain the lead.
He had a very bad pit stop where they put the right rear tire on backwards. They had to change it, and it was in excess of 1 minute pit stop also. So really it put us right back even Steven.
The long stop allowed Ruttman to build a 33-second margin of his own, but his right front continued to give him problems. On lap 148, he was forced to pit, and Vukovich regained the lead. When he returned to the track, Ruttman was behind, but determined to make up the difference. At 150 laps, the lead was 41 seconds. At 160 laps, the gap was 36 seconds. At 170 laps, the lead was 31 seconds.
The way I looked at it at that point, you know, you've heard the old saying, go for it. Well, to me, I don't know what saying I used in my little brain, but I thought if I've ever ran hard and tried hard, now is the time to put all the chips on. So then I remember I was passing cars with 2 wheels in the gravel, all kinds of stuff, trying to make up that time. and I couldn't run any harder without crashing.
Though Ruttman was gaining, it appeared as if Vukovich would reach the finish first. With 10 laps to go, the lead was still 22 seconds. But Vukovich was in trouble. A pivot pin in his steering assembly had cracked, making the car difficult to control. On lap 192, the pin broke, and Vukovich turned the car into the wall to slow himself down. As he climbed out of his car, Ruttman sped by, taking first place.
It took me that entire lap to soak in what had really happened. I think it vexed me so bad that my number one worry at that stage, believe it or not, was Billy. But the next time by him, I could see him out, walking along the wall or sitting on the wall, I've forgotten which. God, he's great. Well, then every second from then on, I'm thinking, gee, honey, talking to my car, I actually talked to it. Hang on now, and with that, if you could see the lap speeds, I backed off to probably, I wasn't running 125 miles an hour.
Ruttman finished the race, knocking 5 minutes off the previous year's record and setting a new standard for average speed. At age 22, Troy Ruttman became the youngest driver ever to win the 500. Perhaps he was too young.
You had friends you didn't know you had and emotional things you could do, and Aggie was a big help to me, but I would say that I was awful young, and it was tough for me to cope with all the things that were happening. Suddenly you were wanted here and to do this and to do that, so it was really a big, big change in my life. It's a shame that I wasn't 10 years older. I would have handled things much better than I did.
In August of that year, the new Indy champion was lining up for a sprint car heat race when his car did a slow roll down the hill. The resulting injuries would keep Ruttman from defending his Indy title in 1953. It was an oppressively hot Hoosier day in 1954. Starting from the 11th spot, Ruttman moved his auto shipper special up to 5th place by the end of the first lap. Quickly, he was up to 4th, then 3rd, right behind Jack McGrath and Jimmy Bryant. The pace was frantic, with the top 3 within car lengths of each other. Ruttman never led, but he did keep pace until a worn tire forced him to the pits before the 20-lap mark. He fell to 20th place. Back on the track, Ruttman ran hard, charging up to 6th position by lap 50. But soon after that, his right rear tire blew. He spun around and drove to the pits on the rim. When he returned, Ruttman again fought back into contention, moving up to 5th place. But like so many other drivers on that hot day, fatigue set in, and on lap 102, Dwayne Carter stepped in for relief. Ruttman returned to the track on lap 175 and finished with a well-deserved 4th place. After failing to qualify in his no-buy for the 1955 race, Ruttman made a comeback of sorts in '56. He was entered to drive the car in which Bob Schweikert won the 1955 race. Starting 11th, Ruttman maneuvered his car to 5th place after 20 laps. Then, going into turn 1, Paul Russo blew a tire, and soon another accident unfolded in the same turn. Ruttman spun to avoid disaster and slid into the infield. He was done for the day. While Troy Ruttman had fallen on hard times, car owner John Zink was on a roll. His cars had won the 500 2 years in a row, and both years his crew chief was A.J. Watson. In 1957, Zink and Watson were going for 3 in a row with a new car and a new driver, Troy Ruttman. Ruttman put his new car on the outside of the first row, and on race day, he battled for the lead. Pat O'Connor jumped ahead for the first 4 laps. Then Ruttman took over and finally retired with a burnt piston.
When it gets excessively hot, sitting in the cockpit like that, you could smell it, so I knew I had a problem. I couldn't believe it because it was running so great. The car was working. I would say that particular year, I probably had the best car, the best chance of winning of any year I ever ran at Indy.
As a result of mounting personal problems, Ruttman missed Indy in 1958 and '59. But through his positive attitude and the understanding of his peers, Troy Ruttman made yet another return to the Speedway in 1960.
The attitude I had was, I'm ready. I can get him. I can beat him. I can win it. And that's the attitude I had, you know. And any year I drove for Zink, again, I felt I had as good a car as anyone, if not better. the best mechanics, the best crew, and so I had an excellent chance in '60.
From the start of the race, Ruttman did look as though he could win it. Averaging record speeds for the first 50 miles, Ruttman moved up from the outside of the second row to take the lead from Roger Ward. By the halfway point, he was still in contention, running in 5th place. But on lap 134, a gear in his rear axle broke, and Ruttman was forced to retire. In 1961, driving an Offie Roadster, Troy qualified on the second day of time trials and started the race 22nd. After 10 laps, Ruttman was in 12th place. After 40 laps, he had moved up to 7th, and soon he was battling for the lead with A.J. Foyt.
As I first broke through the pack and got into second, was moving up on him, they was giving him a board of, I don't know whether it was Ignati giving it to him, whoever told him what to put on the board was giving the go sign to Foyt. Well, they ought to know that Foyt was going as hard as he knew how to go.
Running second at the halfway point, Ruttman tried to make a pit stop. The car wouldn't shift, but Ruttman wasn't quite done for the day.
I patted myself on the head for relief and come by the pit area, and naturally I knew the next time by, when I come in the pits, there would be drivers galore in the pits, and when I did pull in for relief, which I didn't need at all, but the shifting lever broke, well, Ruttman was in line to jump in the car, and they yanked me out, and I crawled aside, and they put Ruttman in, knowing he couldn't go another inch in the car because it was busted. It was running good, sounded great, but you just couldn't get it in gear. And later, after that, you know, they put him in there, and they shoved him, and finally when he got down to the opening, in the middle of the pit row, he turned to the left and took it in the garage area. He come over to me and says, "Thanks for the ride to the garage area," and so that was the end of the day for Ruttman and I both. But it was a good way to end the thing instead of getting mad and throwing your helmet or whatever you could have done, which I don't think is the smart thing to do. So it made the thing going from possibly winning the race to out of the race, and it ended up where it was kind of a good thing for both of us to have it over with in that fashion.
Driving for a new team in 1962, Ruttman had some problems qualifying. His first 2 attempts were waved off. Then finally, on his last attempt, on the last day of time trials, Ruttman made the show. He would start 30th out of 33. Though he started near the back of the field, Troy made his usual race day charge to the front. By the 60th lap, he was in 8th place. At 100 laps, halfway through the race, he was in 5th. And 20 laps later, Ruttman pulled into 2nd place. But the engine was sounding rough. It was smoking. He continued, trailing eventual winner Roger Ward, then falling to 3rd behind Ward and Len Sutton. With a huge puff of smoke on lap 142, Ruttman lost a piston and was forced to quit.
I looked down and the temperature gauge was pegged, and it got hot, so naturally I had to pull in rather than blow the engine. And they found out the problem, what caused that, in that layover engine, which you mentioned, was one of the screws in the side panel of the water jacket unscrewed, and the water leaked out, and that's what caused it to get hot. But that's a year that, again, I feel with ease, not with ease, but I had an excellent chance of winning the race.
Though he remained popular with the fans, Troy Ruttman's driving career was coming to a close. In 1963, he started last, but managed to finish the race without relief for the first time since his 1952 victory. In '64, he spun out while running in 9th place. It was his last start at Indianapolis. Troy Ruttman announced his retirement later that year, saying it was time to make way for the young drivers. He was 34 at the time.
When I decided to retire, wholeheartedly was at Milwaukee, the race following Indy, because I just missed the accident in Indy that killed both Sachs and McDonald by a whisper. How I missed it, I couldn't tell you. Just missed it by luck. Then we went to Indy. Went from Indy to Milwaukee the following week, and Hurt got burned real bad, ran up over the back of Foyt accidentally, and I was close by that. It's not nearly as close as anything, and the fires and the guys getting burned, and I thought it was just best for me to retire.
After becoming involved with the family business in Michigan, Ruttman moved to Venice, Florida, where flying filled the time left open by his retirement from championship auto racing. On the track, Troy Ruttman was tough, always charging and always driving to the front of the pack.
I raced a lot of times with Troy, and he's always been a real hard driver. And sometimes Troy is a dirty driver. You know, he'd come up and bang in the back end and say, "Oh, boy, Jim, I'm sorry, but my foot slipped off of the brake. It had some oil on it and this and that." But Troy's a real race driver, and I can't say enough about the guy because Troy was one of the natural. I've known a lot of race drivers in my time, and he was one guy that could drive anything.
Troy Ruttman was my idol when I started racing. He was very colorful and young and everything. And Troy used to drive for Mr. Agajanian. And Aggie used to tell me that, you know, that Troy never took care of himself, like financially. I mean, he never made any investments for him. He just spent the money and lived high on the hog, so to speak, and advised me not to do that. As a matter of fact, Troy Ruttman himself advised me not to do as he did.
Fighting through difficult times in his personal life, Ruttman's good-natured attitude helped him become a positive influence off of the track as well.
We've had quite a few little skirmishes and, you know, pulling jokes back and forth, but Troy and I together one time at Indianapolis, why, for years and years and years, they'd never allow women in the garage area, in the pits. You know, Troy and I was always pulling jokes and so forth on people, and Clarence Cagle, the superintendent of grounds, he was like God around Indianapolis, and boy, if you did anything bad, why, Clarence Cagle was right on your back. And Clarence was always watching me, and I did a lot of bad things, and I created all the windows to be painted and everything. I was such a mooch around there looking for tools and whatnot when I was racing that everybody painted their garages and so forth. And Troy and I one night, why, we decided to pull a little trick on the guards, and I got a blonde wig and put it on, and I sat over close to Troy, and we just drove right on by the garage, or the guard, and went back in the garage area. And I ran in A.J. Watson's garage real quick and took off the wig and just sat there. Well, here comes all the guards and everybody. They searched the whole garage area that night looking for that girl. And then later on, while I put the wig back on and we drove back out, and the guard he knew Troy was driving, but they really and truly thought there was a girl in the garage area, and that sort of shook Clarence Cagle and the whole crew up.
It was certainly an exciting time. It was the greatest and the most exciting time of my life when Troy won the Speedway.
Never after that was I close to coming back. You know, Gurney and some of those guys would ask me, you know, if I was going to run again, and I just had made up my mind, you know, and Foyt maybe or somebody had mentioned it, am I going to run again? But I'd made up my mind that I was going to quit, and I decided that when I retired from it that I wasn't going to return, and I never have. Never drove an Indy car after that, or just quit altogether. Maybe I should have continued, but I'm happy as the way things are now.
Troy Ruttman's spectacular rise to the top in championship racing made him a hero at Indianapolis. In a race where few have won, and fewer still become legends, Troy Ruttman earned his place with the legends at the Indy 500, a race for heroes.